Hello and welcome to this travel video. I'm Christoph from the YouTube channel BongoPlanes Does Aviation, and together with the Loganair I'll be flying to Scotland, to some of those tight-knit communities and see hopefully wonderful landscapes and learn a lot about knitting. Yes, you've heard right. We will be seeing why Shetland is the knitting mecca that you don't want to miss out on. Journey starts at the Danish North Sea coast, but it could have started anywhere in the world, as Loganair, Scotland's airline, has interline and codeshare agreements with a vast amount of internationally known airlines like British Airways, KLM, Emirates, Turkish Airlines, United Airlines, to name just a few. After a short hop over the North Sea, we arrive at Aberdeen, one of the many Scottish airports from where you can connect onwards towards Shetland. And from here it's another short hop to our first point of entry to Shetland, Sombra.
That's fine, thank you. Good afternoon.
Hello.
It's fine to be your seat number just along the top, thank you.
Thanks so much.
So we have obviously a lot of aircraft coming into Sombra, and we go to Aberdeen, we go to Glasgow, Edinburgh. In the summertime we actually go to London Heathrow, which obviously that opens up the world going through Heathrow. But yeah, we have a lot of international people coming through that'll connect through Aberdeen with like codeshare like KLM, British Airways, Aer Lingus coming from Ireland, lots of different places. So yeah, we just try and connect everybody to where they need to be at whatever time they need to be at.
About an hour's drive from Sombra, we arrive at the little village Bray, where we find our stay for the first few days with the idyllic place the Busta House Hotel. But we'll return to the story of Busta House as we first and foremost have come to Shetland to learn about the famous crafts and especially knitting. The Shetland wool, is that different from wool from other places?
Yes. Because I think our sheep in Shetland, they're hardy, they live up in the hill, and they've got to survive a winter outdoors.
They're outside all year long?
All year long. They don't come down into the lowlands because we don't really have lowlands here. So they don't come down out the hill through the winter. They survive up in the hill. The wool on the Shetland sheep is very tight and insulating, and they are just survive very good. It's a coarser yarn, and it's a very insulating yarn to knit with.
But I guess then it's more like, so if you knit with it, it's more for like outer layers. It's not something you want to have right at your skin.
No, I think it's more a sort of outdoor. Yeah, the cardigans which you would put in another layer, but a jumper, probably you would feel too warm wearing one of them.
Sure. You knit stuff like this, but you knit all sorts of things.
What
kind of things? Maybe you have a supply room or somewhere where we can take a look at it.
Yes, you can come and have a look at my supply room. In you go.
Thank you. So this is where you keep your treasures?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
So these are my products.
So here you have Shetland wool, but you also use wool from other places.
Yes, I've got different types of yarns. I've got merinos, lamb's wool, acrylics, mixes. I sort of work with all sorts of yarns.
What's your favourite yarn?
I think Shetland wool is probably my favourite yarn because it's so versatile, and if you make a mistake, it's quite easy to fix.
That's good.
And it's so nice feel to work with as well.
Yeah.
It's a lovely yarn.
From Astrid and Bray, we head further south as we have heard about a real family business that combines the love for the Shetland crafts and nature. We meet Cecil Tate in one of his fields among some of his sheep. With about 150 of them, he gets visitors from all over the world to see how the Tates are keeping the Shetland traditions alive.
My dad had them for the meat.
Okay.
And we've gotten involved with Wool Week and all that kind of stuff. And we began to see there's a real interest in wool.
Yeah.
And people want to come to a craft and see the sheep, and then they can buy wool from that sheep. Well, people really like to see sheepdogs doing what they do. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really getting into that. My dad was a very good sheepdog handler, and so I've at last got two that are excellent on the sheep.
Okay.
And so I entered one into a sheepdog trial in the summertime, and she did really well. And she actually won the beginner's class. So I actually had people on a class, they're like, can we see her on the sheep? So my idea then is to take folk and show them how we trained them.
So the people are coming from all over the world, I guess, or is it local tourism? Is it?
Probably most of our market is a lot from the US. So we're really involved with Shetland Wool Week.
Yeah.
We saw an awful lot of wool there.
Yeah.
And the thing that we noticed, which is we didn't expect, growing up here, everyone could knit. Everyone had like a book of patterns, and they sort of intuitively knew designs in their head, which really confuses folk that can't do that. But we're finding a lot of people prefer to have a picture of what they could make, have a kit, have the design, the exact design, and they're going to make that. So we're going to create patterns for folk to make.
So when people come here, they can see the sheep, they can touch the wool, they can get some yarn, and they even get instructions how to do it.
Yes.
Perfect. But that's not the only thing you're doing.
No. We'll make furniture as well. Do you want to go that way? Or?
Yeah, let's take a look.
Yeah.
On our way to Cecil's workshop, we meet his brother James, who brings another aspect to the table of this family business.
My own business is I am a self-employed tour guide. My brother Cecil with Paperware Furniture, he's a furniture maker, a designer, and then our family, we've had sheep for a long time. For many generations our family's been crofting, and the two of us together were trying to keep the crofting and the sheep going. So we've tried to bring everything together. So my tour guide in the Island Trails, Cecil with the furniture and the sheep, so we're having people coming, visiting the croft, seeing the sheep.
I know this is a family business, and of course you all have your areas, but what is your personal favorite part of now having this all together with?
For me, with a tour guiding hat on, it's helping people experience Shetland and see all the beauty of Shetland, and not just going to the touristy spots, but kind of connecting with the real traditional life of Shetland, and helping people connect with nature as well.
So Cecil, we are now in the paperwork workshop.
Yes, that's where
here's
everything. Yeah,
the magic happening.
absolutely. We
So-
have fun here. Like I say, we play in here.
So
I enjoy
you
doing
make furniture?
Yeah,
Primarily?
I do a lot of bespoke furniture. And it's kind of evolved a bit. We make a lot of stock things as well now to sell to people.
So Shetland is not really known for having a lot of trees
No, it's
or
really
forests. So where is the wood coming from?
not. A lot of it's coming from, well, we use a lot of oak and ash. So the best quality that to get here is coming from the US or France.
Okay.
We do use some Scottish timber as well, but it's just easier to import stuff like that.
But then once in a while, I know someone does cut down a tree. There are a
Yeah.
few trees here as well.
Yeah, I quite often get a phone call, we're going to cut down a tree, do you want the tree?
So so we have something over here, I believe.
That's an ash tree over here.
That's
somebody
some
cut
local Shetland wood.
down. Yeah, it grew in Shetland, believe it or not, yeah.
So what do you do with that?
Well, it's quite hard because it's quite small. So I did a lot of experimenting a few years ago, and I did find some trees in Shetland would shrink quite slowly
Okay.
if you dried them properly. And what I then started to do was to use them in their organic shape, which people like.
Okay.
So this limb then would become like an upright for a table. And we cleaned off the bark, and we'll clean off this as well. It's a very organic shape to the design.
Despite there not being a lot of trees here on the island, there is some traditional craftsmanship involved around chairs.
There is, yeah, there's a lot of chairs made. So in the past, all the wood came by the sea. So in the olden days, when a boat was going past here, we'd had timber. If it hit a storm, it would kind of like fall off. So we don't get any anymore because they're securely fixed on the boats. Or we do it a little bit, but not so much. So when I was a kid, a lot of the older guys around here, if the wind went to a certain direction, they would know that trees were being blown in from the sea into a certain, we call them gyoes, inlets. So all the furniture in the olden days was from timber that came by the sea, believe it or not.
But you do also some of these traditional, that's a chair, but it's a special chair.
There's a Shetland chair, Shetland design. So it's made with like a frame construction design. It's the way it's constructed and the shape of it and the design. And it's had to be done that way. When the timber came from the sea, you didn't have so much control in drying it out. So in the past, the Shetland chairs were all made with frames. And the jointing, they would all have dowels in here to stop them from falling apart. And nowadays, the glue is so good, you don't have to do that. Sometimes you do, but not so much.
So the design, how it looks today, is really inherited from how they had to make the chairs back in the day, so they would not come apart.
Yeah, and in the olden days, the best Shetland chairs had like an oak frame, say, but nearly all of them had like a pine seat and back. And I think from doing a lot of them, it's so much easier to hand plane pine than it is oak.
Okay.
So I think they use pine for that just because it was much easier to make.
Next to the paperwork workshop, we find Cecil's better half, Jennifer Tate, who takes care and knows all about the yarn coming from their sheep. You are right at the source. The wool that we see here behind us has started from here, from your sheep. What happens when the wool comes from the sheep? How do you then get it into the shelf here?
So at the moment, because it's such small amounts, we have to send it down to England, where it gets cleaned and processed and spun into yarn. They do the colour for us as well, but we spend a lot of time getting the colour just the way we want it. So there's a lot of going back and forth to the company just to get the right shades and the right colour.
So talking about the colours, like I mean, we see pretty much all the colors that we can imagine, but is there some colors or color combinations that are like specifically Shetland or Shetland heritage? How do you go about that?
We want to try and get a colour for everybody, so we've tried to incorporate lots of different shades and colours, but there is, going back years and years to when they first started dyeing and working with wool, when they were using the natural products that they had to dye the wool, there was specific colours that they would get. So you would get kind of dark reds, dark blues, quite bright blues actually, dark maroons and quite a bright yellow. So we've tried to incorporate that into the wool as well, so you've got that little bit of heritage as well. But we're also trying to get our own colours that are inspired from what we see around us and the nature, the sea, the grass, the sky.
Yeah.
So incorporate that in too.
So we have the heritage, we have the more modern, but still inspired by what you have locally around you. I guess it's quite the process to really choose the right color and get from what you see to then get it into the wool.
Yes, we spend a lot of time. So we have like a yellow colour that was actually inspired from lichen that we found on rocks when we were out for a walk one day.
Yeah.
And just the process of trying to capture that colour on a photo, do a little sample so we can send it to the company to then get a sample back and go, no, that's not quite right. So there's a lot of going back and forth until we get the colour that we want. Surprisingly, which really surprised us, the natural colours are the best seller.
Okay.
So people want the natural undyed product that just comes from the sheep without having dyes on it. So at the moment our best seller has actually been our natural white, and we did this beautiful mixed colour, but this is actually a blend of our dark and light wools, and this has been our best seller this year. We've only got 2 balls left of this.
Surprising. Okay.
So it's very surprising because we thought colours would be what people want, but a lot of people just want the natural product.
We head back up north to Bray and the Busta House Hotel, a hotel with just 23 rooms that however oozes of the classic Scottish atmosphere with the traditional long room lounge and cosy rooms. Busta House is a place of history. The classic manor house was the stage of a true family drama, with mysterious deaths, a secret alleged marriage, extortion, desire and its unfortunate consequences, truly worthy of an Agatha Christie mystery. And it is here that we let our day end before we continue our journey. So after a few days at the picturesque Busta Hotel just outside of Bray, I want to hear a little bit more about the history of the craftsmanship here from Shetland. And that is why we are now heading towards Lerwick, where there is a textile museum. So as I'm making my way to the Textile Museum in Lerwick, I thought I'd do a quick stop with Steve here, because you are an expert in tourism when we talk Shetland. So Steve, who is coming to Shetland and where they're coming from?
Well, that's actually a difficult question because they come from absolutely everywhere. We have many international visitors, and they come for all sorts of different reasons and at different times of the year.
So what are the main reasons for tourists to come to Shetland? I know there's a lot of excitement about the crafts here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And probably the most famous thing would be fair isle knitting, and that is a major part of our tourist offering. We have very many talented knitters and crafters in Shetland, and of course we have very specifically, we have Shetland Wool Week, and this is really what you might call a mecca for those craft people, those knitters. We have fantastic artists living and working in Shetland, so really it covers the whole side of crafts.
So if I am a tourist and think Shetland, that's just my cup of tea, where can they find some information about what to do and what to find?
We've got we have a very good website at Visit Scotland, so www.visitscotland.com, but also Promote Shetland. They have shetland.org, and you'll find a lot of really interesting information on there. And of course people don't just come for crafts, there are lots of other reasons. They come for our landscape and our wildlife and our archaeology and our geology. Shetland is a geopark, I'm not sure if you knew that. We're one
it's
of
UNESCO protected, I think.
That's right, it's a UNESCO geopark.
So there are many good reasons to visit Shetland today, but now let's hear more about the history, and what better place to do so than at the Textile Museum in Lerwick, where we meet Elizabeth and her colleague, who through their dedication convey the deeply rooted history of Shetland knitting.
Well, there is a long history of knitting in Shetland, and I suppose it started as a way of families to supplement their income and livelihood many years ago, although they weren't paid in cash for their knitting. Their knitwear was exchanged for goods at the local merchants, and that was not, they didn't have an open choice about what they exchanged the goods for. They were offered certain goods, and it was a case of take it or leave it. It was a way of trying to increase the livelihood of the family. Knitting nowadays is very much more of a, hand knitting particularly, very much more of a hobby and an enjoyable pastime. In days gone by, it was something that women particularly had to do. There was almost no choice to it, and you didn't sit down without taking your knitting.
There was even a saying about that.
There was a saying about that. If you sat down and didn't lift your knitting, somebody would say, "Are you going to sit all night hand idle?" Meaning you're sitting down but your hands are not working. So
tough business.
Yeah. So they were always producing something that was going to be exchanged for some kind of goods at the merchant's discretion. It was up to them what they got. So quite often they were exchanged for tea. Was one thing that was one that was given in exchange for knitted goods. Well, sugar, things that they couldn't produce themselves.
Because meats they could get from their sheep, I guess.
Well, they lived off what they could produce on the crafts that they had. It's also one of the interesting things, I think, is that for women who were in Lerwick, which is the main town, they were subject to the same rules, I suppose. Their knitting was exchanged for goods, but there was a limit of how much tea and sugar that they could use. They couldn't always get the things that they actually really needed. So, and some things that sometimes it was exchanged for other types of clothing they weren't producing themselves. So they were very well dressed, but their families might be going hungry. So they could give you a cup of tea with some sugar in it, and they would have a nice clothing on, but they didn't have the basics that they needed to feed their families. There were a couple of things that happened that promoted Shetland knitwear to a wider audience outside Shetland, particularly for the Shetland lace knitting. That was promoted by Arthur Anderson, one of the founders of the P&O shipping company. He was actually born in this room here in the museum, but went off to London and made his fortune and remembered where he came from. He presented a dozen pairs of lace, hand-knitted lace stockings to Queen Victoria, and that kick-started the demand for Shetland lace.
So that really put Shetland knitting on the map?
That put it on the map as far as the lace was concerned. And then in the early 1920s, the then Prince of Wales, Prince Edward, he was painted wearing a Fair Isle jumper, and that stimulated demand for the Fair Isle knitwear as well. So there were outside influences that created a demand for Shetland knitwear and helped sustain it through early 19th and 20th centuries. And then in the 1920s and 30s, knitting machines became available. But Shetland didn't have the same history as other areas of textile production in Britain, because there's no natural resources that were big enough to sustain a mechanised factory setting. So knitwear remained very much in people's homes, but the hand frame knitting machines, the domestic machines, that created another new industry, and that kept it very much in locally within people's homes. And so that is one of the reasons I think that the Shetland tradition has sustained. So that all the old techniques that have been handed down through the generations are still very much alive today, and they've been adapted when new modern production methods have come in. So people will knit the pieces on the knitting machine, but they still use the old traditions.
But there was also a time on Shetland where knitting almost went out of, well, you can't say out of fashion, but it almost disappeared.
Well, it did. With the coming of the oil industry to Shetland in the 70s and especially through the 80s, suddenly there were a lot of jobs available for men and women outside the home that were very well paid. And the decades of drudgery could be left behind. So women no longer had to spend all their hours knitting when they weren't doing other things, because they had well-paid jobs, and the demand for the Shetland knitwear, because of fashion reasons and also because there wasn't so much of it, people producing it, then it did definitely go through a bit of a slump.
But despite the challenges after the discovery of oil, the knitting tradition never died out on Shetland and has ever since made a strong comeback, although it has moved on from the harsh reality of it being necessary to survive to being an enjoyable hobby for locals and tourists alike. This is also reflected in Lerwick's High Street, where many small and charming shops can be found. We make a stop at Loose Ends as a good example for a shop that keeps Shetland knitting alive.
So my son and I own the shop, and we've had it for about a year, and we're the 5th owners of Loose Ends. It's been going since 1991, and it's always been called Loose Ends, so it's been nice to have that continuation. We've got local wools, we've got local crafts, we've got a wide array of knitting needles, we've got haberdashery, fabric, and kind of a one-stop shop. So whatever you might need for crafting, we usually would have it. But what we do try to promote is the local wool and a few local crafts. But when people come, they seem to be very savvy that this is a very wool-oriented area. And the wools are amazing to work with. A lot of the dyed wools, they use a gray, or not just the white wool to dye onto, but like gray wools to dye onto. And you get a real rustic feel to the wool. It looks amazing.
From Loose Ends, it's just a few steps to another example of Shetland crafts being kept alive, an Avril Thompson-Smith's art gallery.
Well, Shetland art is very unique because we have a very unique landscape. It's very rugged, it's remote, so many beautiful colours. We're surrounded by sea and hills, so capturing all that in a piece of artwork is really special and very different from things that other people have seen. My artwork specifically, I like to capture colour. I get very excited about colour, so the sunrises and the sunsets, beautiful pinks, yellows, blues, greys. It's all going on in Shetland. And in the summer months, we get the beautiful wildflowers that pop up in May. So that's always very exciting. And I like to try and capture all of these things in my artwork. So I predominantly go and explore Shetland. I look and observe all the beauty of the hills and the wildflowers and the croft houses, and then that's all captured in my work. So some of my work is very, very colourful, very passionate. Other pieces of work are very muted with the darker, greyer tones of our autumn and winter seasons. But it's very special, very different, and I'm very proud of it. And all of the people that come to Shetland get very excited about it because it is a little bit different.
Apart from the knitting and the many crafts, one thing that has truly put Shetland on the map is the home of D.I. Jimmy Perez, the main character of the first 7 seasons of the very popular crime series fittingly known as Shetland. And when strolling through Lerwick and the commercial street, well, you can find his home. Now, I have traveled places all around the world and I have been sitting in planes since very early infancy. But it is no secret that knitting is not the biggest area of expertise for me. So I feel like I've learned quite a bit already on this trip when talking with people here from Shetland that are cultivating this craft. But what about the hobbyists? Those who are knitting at home and even are traveling to places like Shetland to cultivate their hobby. Now, I have brought someone very special along on this trip, and that is my mother. She is an avid knitter, and I want to hear from her what it is to be a knitter.
Det at strikke betyder faktisk rigtig meget for rigtig mange. In fact, knitting means a lot to a lot of people, probably mostly women, but also to quite a few men who find it a good hobby. For me, knitting is a form of meditation. When I knit, I relax. I get my thoughts in order, and a lot of things fall into place while I'm knitting. Rigtig mange ting falder på plads, mens man sidder og strikker. Strikningen er også en kreativ proces, hvor man... Knitting is also a creative process where you get the opportunity to play with colors and shapes. The material wool, cotton too, is really nice to work with. And the joy of ending up with a finished product is a big thing. At stå med et færdigt produkt er også en stor ting.
Men nu er vi jo på Shetland. But now we are in Shetland, and I have learned on this trip that there are a lot of people who go to Shetland because of the knitting. So there is also something with this hobby about getting around.
Altså strikning er jo også en form for... Knitting is also a form of diving into culture. Different countries, different regions have their own patterns and their own techniques. They are completely unique and different from what you find elsewhere. I think it's fun to dive into and to study and look at.
With many new impressions gained, we end the day with a stay at the Grand Hotel before we leave Lerwick behind and once more head south. Heading towards the little former fishing village Hoswick, where we have heard about a group of enterprising women that have come together and created a unique arts and crafts community.
We've been here for 100 years.
There've been LJ Smith knitwear being made in Hoswick, and other businesses have come over the years, and it's just nice to all work together to bring in the visitors and a nice little community hub.
Hoswick is a beautiful village that has an industrious past. So for the last 100 years there's been activity, creating, making happening in Hoswick.
And it's a very much a together community. I think we share all sorts of different events in the village, and just naturally, unusually for Shetland as well, there's a collection of houses that are quite close together. So sort of location-wise, Shetland is often spread out. The villages have come about because of crofters, and there's lots of spaces between houses because of the land, whereas Hoswick is a fishing village traditionally, so the houses are close together, and so that brings this natural hub.
So there's a few of us together that are working together as artists for the good of each other, to promote what we do, and also to showcase Shetland and our heritage to the world.
Carlin Anderson's little shop can be found near the beach. She has a over 30-year career creating jewellery with designs deeply rooted in Shetland history and heritage.
The jewellery that we make here, or any of the crafts that we make here, are very special because for a lot of people, like myself, we're inspired by what we see around us. So I create bespoke jewellery, so that can often be pieces for an individual, and with them I'm taking in all their needs and desires and the things that they care about. But I also create collections which are ready to wear that are all about stories, and those stories come from, I guess, who I am. And I'm a woman who grew up in Shetland on a farm in quite a practical, beautiful environment, so a lot of my collections sort of reflect that.
A little further up the road, we find the shop Nila Nell that is a great example of the ever-evolving traditions and openness of Shetland to embrace new thinking.
When you first walk in the door of our little shop, then people are often quite surprised, because what we do here is not the traditional Shetland knitwear. Shetland knitwear, Fair Isle knitwear is famous all over the world. And when Nila first opened this place, she was an outsider to Shetland. She was born in Canada originally. She moved, she worked in the north of Scotland as a solicitor for many years before coming to Shetland. She changed her life, came to Shetland to study contemporary textiles, and then she opened this place. So the wee shop that we're standing in used to be her garage, and the workshop where we make all of our things now, that used to be her house. So she's literally sort of grown out of this small place. But she definitely didn't want to try and replicate or copy what Shetlanders already do so well. So instead she comes from a very different angle. She likes to start with concepts or with questions or things that are not tangible, don't have a visual starting point, and work through those stories until she finds a way to explain it using something visual.
But those seeking the traditional Shetland knitwear won't be disappointed either, as only a few meters down the road we have Shetland Woolen Company that, with its 100-year history, has been an anchor in the little community.
We've been here for 100 years, and all the knitwear is made here on the premises, if not in people's homes, which, you know, we take great pride in producing quality, authentic Shetland knitwear. Most of the wool comes from Jameson Spinning, which is just 40 miles away on the west side of the mainland. If not some of our super soft, we do get from mainland Scotland. So if it's not Shetland, then it's certainly Scottish.
So while Shetland Woolen Company played an important role for Lerwick business over decades, what best shows what brings the community, this group of crafters and indeed many more artists from the surrounding areas together today is the Hoswick Visitor Centre, where rosemary is an important fixed point.
Originally it was a weaving shed, and when that weaving stopped, then the community worked together, formed a group and bought the building to be for use by the community as a visitor centre basically, and including a cafe, because that was certainly needed in our wider community here. But to make it more viable, we've also made the building available to the community, so it's used by lots of groups in the evening, like choir, fiddle and accordion, guides and so on. So it's a busy building.
Hoswick is truly a great example of a tight-knit Shetland community that bridges the gap of preserving the past while being open-minded to new ideas and developments. And with that experience, we continue our journey, but this time we head westwards. And so we have almost reached the end of our journey here around Shetland. We have reached the beautiful Scalloway. One thing I haven't learned on this trip is how to knit, but I feel like I have gained a much deeper understanding of the Shetland culture. One thing that has impressed me the most on this trip is the willingness to not being stuck in the past, but respecting the heritage while still being open and creative and finding new ways on how to express Shetland culture. Perhaps out of necessity, because it has never been a rich society, at least not in monetary value.
Man kan strikke alene og have det rigtig, rigtig godt med det. You can knit alone and feel really, really good about it. But knitting is also a means for socializing, as we see with knitting clubs, which a great many, probably mostly women, have. You have fun together, but you also inspire each other. You help each other if something is difficult, and you get good ideas. Nye ting, får gode idéer.
So why do you think people from all over the world come here for knitting?
I think it's probably the colours, variety, different styles, the things you can do with your yarn. I am just blown away with how many people come from all over the world to Shetland to see the yarns and the knitting and come on courses and to shop.
People that come to Shetland know that sheep is we've got like 23,000 people and over 200,000 sheep. So wool is a big thing for us here.
But it's a living history as well. One of the reasons that it has survived so long is that it develops with the changes in the fashions.
It's quite exciting because I think Shetland, as well as being about the tradition and the preserving these old ways of working, it's also a very innovative place. It's a place that, by its nature, we have to be independent. If something breaks, our mentality is we need to fix it because we're not in a position to just nip to, the nearest city because that's a long way away.
The last stretch of our journey brings us back to where it all started, Sombra, from where Loganair brings so many of Shetland's visitors to and from this impressive part of the world. What will remain with me for a long time are the incredible people, the dedication for their crafts and the impressive Shetland landscapes.